98% of unwanted behaviors are because of some sort of emotional or organizational or executive function challenge, whether it's stress related, PTSD, trauma, ADHD, anxiety, you name it.
Today, we're talking about navigating divorce with neurodiversity. We're going to be discussing insights and strategies. Partnering or parenting with neurodiverse individuals requires creativity, patience, and adaptability, qualities that become even more essential during divorce. And this episode explores how to approach these challenges with compassion and strategy. And with me today is a very dear friend of mine and return guest, Diane Dempster. Hey, Diane.
Hi, Karen.
Just a little bit about Diane. She is the co-founder of impactparents.com. She brings a wealth of knowledge to this conversation. She's a phenomenal teacher and trainer and has a lot of certifications. You can read all about Diane and her background in the show notes, but let's just dive right in.
Well, and if you're podcasting, which you are, you can find me on my podcast, which is Parenting with Impact, everywhere you find your podcasts.
Absolutely. And check that out. And so, Diane, before we dive in, I have a question that I ask all my guests before we begin. I know I didn't give you a heads up. No heads up for you. And so it's a pretty easy one. Can you tell us something that you're most proud of in your life?
Well, people have heard this story before because I did a success story episode like a million years ago. So go back and listen to my success story thing. But I'm talking to a community that's dealing with and struggling with divorce. And I would tell you that one of the things that I am most proud of in my life is how I navigated my divorce. And I owe a lot of that to you, Karen. Thank you. Karen and I first met because she was my divorce coach before, back in the day.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. But no, I think it's really interesting because we're recording this at the time of the holiday season. And I've been spending a more than average time during the holiday with my ex. And I'm astonished. I'm proud. I'm like all the things at like what I've been able to navigate in what was a really complex divorce. And a lot of it had to do with my ex's neurodiversity, transparently, and how I didn't handle it the way that I wish that I would have. Now I'm in retrospect 15 years later, right? But I am proud of what the outcome of that has been, because like my current partner was traveling and I needed a ride to the doctor. And I'm like, no question, I can call my ex and say, hey, dude, need a ride to the doctor. Are you available on Tuesday? And it's stuff like that, I mean, that's really the longer answer to your question, but I'm proud of what I've created in my divorce process.
Yeah. And as you should be. You have such a unique and special relationship that came with intentionality and hard work. I actually just had a client this morning who was like, do people ever divorce and talk to each other and get along? And I was like, oh yes.
Well,
yes,
talk to each other and getting along might be two different things, but that's a whole other conversation, but we may actually dive into that a little bit today as well.
So thank you so much for that. So let's dive into this topic of neurodiversity, and let's start with 101. Can you describe what this word means and the people who would consider themselves or who would be considered neurodiverse, what that variety is?
Yeah. Well, it's two words. There's neurodiversity, and then there's this idea of neurodivergence, right? It's this sort of neurodiversity is the idea that everybody's brains work differently. And they do, right? It's this sort of, and historically there has been this definition that there was something called neurotypical, which meant that most of us have brains that work a certain way. And then there was people that were neurodivergent whose brains worked a different way. But when you look at the numbers, the reality is that a large number of humans, probably as much as 60%, are either situationally neurodivergent, which means that either our stress or our environment is causing a situation where our brains are not quite working the way they even normally work, right? It's just sort of when we're in a calm situation. Or people who have things like ADHD, anxiety, autism, giftedness, people with trauma and PTSD, people who have processing differences like dyslexia or language or sensory sensitivities. All of these are differences
Right.
But the idea here is that everyone's brain works differently, and there are people who struggle because their brain doesn't work the way that society or most people or whatever their work environment. For kids, it's often their school environment. These are people who struggle with life, learning, emotions, all of those sorts of things. So that's a long answer to a short question, but does that give you a sense of, I think that we always say, I like the word neurospicy, right? So I'll use that word more often. But we also at Impact Parents use the term complex, right? And I always say, if you've got a complex kid, you know you have a complex kid because they're struggling. And whether they're struggling situationally, again, you're dealing with a divorce situation, stress levels are very high. And all of us as humans, when our stress levels and our anxieties and our emotions are up, our brains work and operate in a very different way. And so it's about recognizing that as well.
Well, but let's head into that, this other layer. So you may have a child with neurodiversity, but then if we're talking primarily to the high conflict audience, my experience is there's usually neurodiversity on one side, there's trauma on the other side, or there's a mix of both on both sides. And so, and then we're making babies in a conflict-ridden household because we don't understand each other, and so we judge each other and all of this. And so it sounds a little bit like it could be a hot mess. And I sometimes will be talking to clients, and my kid is starting to act like the high conflict person my spouse is, and then all of a sudden labels and judgment and fears go all over the place. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you can speak to that to help our listeners settle into what is with less judgment about it?
Well, and I think that it's a great way to frame it, as we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today. We were originally going to just talk about what do you do if your kids are neurodiverse. And statistically, if you've got a complex kid, either you or your co-parent or both are likely to have challenges of neurodiversity as well, right? Whether it's anxiety, ADHD, just stress related challenges, PTSD, trauma related, all of those sorts of things. And there's a lot of good work out there about the interplay between all of these things. And I don't necessarily want to get into whether it's trauma based or PTSD or ADHD or whatever it is. But the reality is that the other human, whether it's your person you're trying to co-parent with or whether it's your child, is struggling either with their emotions or with their organization or with their self-worth, their self-awareness. And I think that that's a lot of it. It's like the term executive function, Karen, I know you know this, but the executive function is a part of the brain that controls everything we think, everything we do, and everything we feel, right? And that's the part, if you've got a child who's got ADHD or autism or anxiety, that's the part that's impacted. And that's the part that's most impacted by stress. And it's the part of our brain that helps us to not pull the cat's tail when we know that the cat's going to scratch us. It's the part of us that helps us to stay organized and follow through on the things that we say that we're going to do. It's the part of us that remembers that we don't call our co-parent a bad name in front of the kids. It's like all of those things are impacted by executive function. And so there are real things that are going on. And it's really easy particularly when you're stressed and in a high conflict environment, to just see the challenge at its face value, right? And so let's use the example of unkind words, right? It's just sort of, I have parents who have kids who's, they tell them, I hate you, mom, you're terrible, you're the worst mom ever, right? And that's never okay in a relationship. And yet these kids have a hard time processing, oh, wait, I'm not supposed to do this. I'm so upset. I'm so full of emotion. The part of my brain that remembers that I'm not supposed to call my mom a whatever it is shut down. And it's true with neurodiverse adults as well. And so I'm not trying to excuse unkind, unfriendly, unacceptable behavior. And I know for myself personally and professionally that 98% of unwanted behaviors are because of some sort of emotional or organizational or executive function challenge, whether it's, again, stress related, PTSD, trauma, whatever it is that's underneath it, ADHD, anxiety, you name it.
100%. And yeah, I'll share, and I have that both of my kids have certain neurodiversities that they're challenged with. I remember once my daughter being really mean, just mean and nasty. And she called me back, whatever, later that day or the next day. And she was like, as I was saying those things, there was this other voice in my head going, she's your person. You love her. She's not your enemy. And yet she was slaying me with her words. And so even in the moment, the fact that she could see both, I thought was pretty impressive. But that quieter, mom's your person, like had no authority, no control over whatever that knee-jerk emotional reactivity was that she had, which I think was all wound up in her issues.
And I think that the layer that gets added is with regard to our co-parent and the patterns, right? It's this sort of, if we've got a kid who's like that, statistically, we may also have an ex, a soon to be ex, or a current person that has some of those same traits. And so, particularly if we've decided that that trait is no longer something I can tolerate in my life, we put up a boundary, we've decided I need to leave this marriage, this person is not doing what they say, this person is volatile, this person is whatever the diversity is that's showing up. We look at our kids and we go, oh my gosh, they're going to turn out just like mom, or they're going to turn out just like dad.
100%.
And I'm terrified because somebody in the future, 30 years from now, is going to do the same thing that I'm doing, which is to say, I can't be with you anymore. And then our child is going to be rejected. And it's going to be this sort of la, 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 right? Well, so good news is that you're aware of it, right? It's just sort of, neurodiversity isn't about saying, okay, this is just the way this human is forever and ever and ever. Although there may be aspects to a neurodiverse human's personality that is just part of their wiring. And it's about, how do I figure out how to have compassion for that? How do I work around that? How do I navigate through that in a way that feels healthy for me and is respectful and honest to the other human? So it's recognizing who they are and inspiring and helping them in the areas where they can change their behavior when they're ready to change their behavior. And that's where the tricky part comes in, because a lot of times these kids are big emotions for a really long time and they're not yet able to manage their emotions. And so they show up like the co-parent who never learned how to manage their emotions,
Right.
and we freak out.
Well, and actually, you just brought up, it's kind of like the perfect storm. So here I am trying to set boundaries with the partner who I didn't set boundaries with. Now that I'm getting healthy, I'm saying like, no, that's not acceptable. And at the same time, I have to be flexible that it's acceptable with my kids, because I'm understanding where my kids are at and what their capabilities are. And I could see how divorce being so chaotic, coming out of a high conflict situation being chaotic, and now being like, boundaries, no boundaries, yes, no, wait a second.
Well, but hang on. So I'm going to key in on one of the words that you said, which is acceptable, right? And it's this sort of, the tool you use when someone's behavior doesn't feel healthy, acceptable, whatever word we want to use for it, right?
Yep.
You might use a very different tool with an adult that you've tried for years and years and years to get them to change their behavior than you might with a 9-year-old. I mean, this mom that I was working with, whose kid was like, I hate you, you're the worst mom ever. This kid was enormous emotions. He was completely dysregulated when he would do this. And it was his pattern that she would be like, oh, wow, this kid is really, really off his wobble right now. He's really wobbly. He's really upset. And this is how it shows up when he's really upset. When he's really upset, he's not going to be able to hear you say, you can't talk to me that way. He needs help to come up with other tools to, what do I do when I get really upset? I need to stop telling mom that I hate her. And I need to figure out maybe like the tool that I taught this particular mom, and I teach all the time, is a code word, right? It's just sort of, my daughter, who's now 23, her code word when she would get really angry and we'd get into that sort of blah, she'd use the word burrito. And if she said the word burrito, it's like, okay, wait, I need to just
like a safety word.
It's a safety word, right? It's a sort of, she would say burrito. And so instead of saying, mom, I hate you, or whatever, like was really kind of that reactive sort of thing, she would say burrito. And that was that signal. But I had to teach her that. I had to help her learn that in a time that wasn't in the middle of the heated sort of thing. And this is the challenge, is that so many of us have reached the end of our rope with our co-parent. And the tools are very different when you've got a kid who may not yet be ready to learn the tools of self-management because they're still emotionally immature, if that makes sense. And it gets scary, and so part of this is dealing with our own stuff, because we need to be able to say, even though this 6-year-old is doing the same sorts of behaviors that this 40-year-old is, I'm willing to consider that I have time to work and support this. So going back to your word acceptable, right? They can still be doing it and it can still not be acceptable, but that doesn't mean it has to change overnight, or that it's realistic for it to just change overnight. And I think that that's where we get stuck, is that we see a neurodivergent person and we say, okay, they should be able to change this, right? And I think about, like, I don't know about you, Karen, but when I get triggered, I have that sort of inflamed, sort of reactive thing. And I have a deal now with my partner that there are certain things we will just not say. And it took me a long time, because it was what I would say when I was really angry. And it's like, it took me a while to learn how to say something different, because my partner didn't find it to be kind. It's worked in other relationships, but for this person, it was a trigger for them. And so there's change management that has to happen underneath this. And we want to assume that our neurodivergent kids are willing to try to change, and not just that they can't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think beautifully described. And what I want to leave the listener with is, on the one side, with the person that you're divorcing, boundaries are healthy, boundaries are good, and whether or not they can or can't control themselves, boundaries are necessary. And that's a whole nother topic that they
Well,
don't
and I know you got an episode about boundaries, but the reminder is, a boundary is something I do, not something that they do. It's like, you can't call me that name is not a boundary. When you use that word with me, I'm going to X, I'm going to step out of the room. I'm going to remind you to call me something different. I'm going to do, that's a boundary. And those are actually really healthy with our kids too. It's like, hey, if you call me a poo-poo head, I'm going to hold up my hands and go, hang on, or whatever it is that you're going to do. But so keep going with your comment.
Yeah, so that's perfect. Exactly. So a boundary doesn't require their participation. And then with children, so I think what I'm hearing you say is, you don't have to worry about what he or she, your spouse, can or can't, did or didn't. Like, you've already worked that through. You're setting your boundaries, you're heading for divorce. But at the same time, you may be dealing with very similar types of behavior in your child. And so I want you to just talk, Diane, about how you're actually navigating the two differently. And we know that a story is running the show in the listener's mind. And I remember thinking, oh my God, my son, I divorced my husband, and now my son is like showing up as the ghost of husband past.
Right.
And he wasn't. But my story was that he was, which triggered me more, which left me with less access to my prefrontal cortex. So I was reacting. So how do we help our listener with this? I don't know if dichotomy is really the right word, but with these varying situations where you may be dealing with neurodiversity on both sides, but you're handling your children very differently
Yeah, no,
than
I
you're
think
handling your spouse.
that there's a couple of steps to this. And the first one is the one that you alluded to, which is, how do I keep myself as regulated as I can? And it's this sort of, how do I recognize that, oh, wait, this isn't about my kid, this is about my ex, because my kid is showing up in some pattern that reminds me of my ex. And so how do I separate that from, wow, my kid has some concerning behaviors, which may be true and may be a struggle, and it may be mostly just your reminder in your system that, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible, there's the story, blah blah blah, right? So that's the first step, is really doing the work around your story. And I think that that's a big part of what you teach. It's a big part of what we talk about at Impact Parents. I'm actually teaching a class. I teach a class a couple of times a year, which is about the personal development journey of parenting, which is like this sort of, parenting is this perfect playground to look at our inner shit, right? It's this sort of, that's the opportunity here. But so if I can recognize, oh, wait, this is my stuff. Yes, there's part of this that it belongs to your ex or your soon to be ex or whatever else. And there's a huge part of this that is the story you've created to protect yourself for good reason. But so that's the first thing, is recognizing, okay, wait, help me not project this story onto my kiddo. Step two is to really look at what the opportunity is, right? And the opportunity is going to be different if you've got a 9-year-old acting out or if you've got a 19-year-old acting out.
Right.
Right. And so you're going to have a different relationship with that 19-year-old. You're going to, and your tendency might be a little bit more panicked because they're older and it's like, oh my gosh, they're like an adult and what can I do? I can't make them do it. And I think that that's the piece from a parenting perspective. A lot of the tools in our toolbox that we use when our kids are little are very directive based. This is what we do. This is what we don't do. I'm in charge. I'm going to tell you how to be. I'm going to tell you. And that's normal when our kids are 7 and under. And as they get older, we lose our capacity. I'm not going to say it that way. It's not that we lose our capacity. The tools that we used to use don't work the same way. And most of us don't learn the new tools, right? It's just sort of, we don't shift from, I can control this human, which we can, let's face it, you can control a 3-year-old to a certain extent, maybe not if they're in the middle of the terrible threes, but that's a whole other conversation. But you can put rules and agreements and blah, blah, blah. It's like this sort of, you can be in that director role. And then our kids get to be teenagers and they want to own their own life, and they do have their own life, and they're not connected to us in the same way. And so a big part of what we teach at Impact Parents is coaching tools to parents, because coaching is an empowerment based modality. We want to help our kids to be successful, to be happy, to be launched eventually. And we don't want to drag them kicking and screaming to their future. We want to help them navigate into their future. And so so step 1 is your own self-management. 2 is what's the opportunity. And then 3 is what's my tools. It's a sort of, my opportunity is, hey, I really want to help this other human who happens to be my child to see if they can change their behaviors, because their behavior is getting in the way of a healthy relationship with me. And that behavior might get in the way of healthy relationships with other humans, which is like the common thing. So it might be they're yelling or using violent language. It might be that they're not following through when they say that they'll follow through. It might be that they're defensive. They're doing the blame game. It's like, oh, it's not my fault that I didn't turn in my homework. My teacher didn't tell me this. It's like, there's all this sort of stuff that goes on, but it's what I would call an unwanted behavior. And then we go, okay, so what's the opportunity here? Can I help this human change their behavior? And then what are the tools in my toolbox to help this human change their behavior? And I think that the biggest challenge is that we don't have a robust toolbox for helping adults or almost adult humans with behavior change, because we know how to control, but we don't know how to influence. We don't know how to navigate, particularly if there's all this emotion involved, because again, there's some of our stuff that's built into it.
So that's interesting. So if you're saying control versus, what was the word you used?
Influence.
Versus influence. So,
and versus like, there's control, there's influence, there's inspiration, right? It's just sort of, as our kids get older, we want to inspire them to change. And change for a 19-year-old with anxiety might be really hard, right? And so they might need time to even believe that it's possible to change, because they've been doing this little thing to keep themselves safe for so long that there's part of this journey might be to break them free from whatever it is that's holding them back in the first place.
So I'm very curious. What's coming up for me is the level of conflict in these households, right? So when we have that level of conflict, I know I had more judgment than grace when I was in that spot. And so if you're coming out of high conflict and your spouse is criticizing you and you're criticizing the spouse, and the kids are hearing all of this conflict, which we know is the worst thing. And now we're talking about, okay, let's shift things. You're heading into the divorce. Our thing is, with your spouse, we can help you get crystal clear on boundaries, and you just don't have to bang your head against that wall anymore. But there's a whole culture, dare I say, of negativity, judgment, unsafe zones in many of these households because of the level of conflict that everyone's gotten used to. What do you use? So if we're talking about tools, I'm hearing with young kids, we can be the director. What is a tool or two that you can suggest that can help our listener pivot more toward influencing or inspiring versus what's your freaking problem? I told you that 12 times. You're being lazy, or whatever judgment is coming out of the parent's mouth.
Well, there's a couple of things that come up. One is modeling. And I think that this is the big thing. It's like, yes, you've been in a relationship where, and I'm going to use the word conflict because you use the word conflict, Karen. It's not, we're talking about arguing, not about differences of opinion, just we're talking about an escalated
Yes.
level of that sort of thing. And so modeling that is just sort of refusing to engage with that. If you want to not have your kids yelling, maybe
Don't
it's a
yell.
commitment to don't yell as the first step, right? It's a sort of, even if your co-parent's yelling at you, I know it's hard. Personally, I've experienced that it's hard. And if your agreement is, hey, kids, I'm going to do whatever I can not to raise my voice and not to use these words and not to whatever it is, and partner with you kids to create this agreement. What feels safe? What doesn't? It doesn't feel safe when you call me this, right? It's a sort of, what are the words that you use that make your kids feel wobbly? What are the words that you, what can you say when you're angry that feels safe to your kids? It's this sort of, you're trying to recalibrate the family system to go, this is what we do when we are angry, because people get angry. We all do. And your kids and you have been living in an environment where not only is it been that you're getting angry, but it has not felt safe being in an environment where someone was angry in the household. And so it's about recalibrating. If we're talking specifically about conflict and raised voices and potentially violent words, those sorts of things, model and reach an agreement and model with your kids. And even with our kid, and not expect, this is the side effect of it, not expect that just because there's an agreement means that everybody's going to be able to adhere to it. I was saying that to you like 10 minutes ago. It's like, I had an agreement that I was going to say X, Y, and Z when I got really angry. And to this day, it's like really hard for me not to say X, Y, and Z when I get really, really angry, because the part of my brain is not shut down. So part of this is compassion and grace in the family system to go, hey, you know what? I said that thing that I said I wasn't going to say, and I'm really sorry, and I'm working on it. Will you help me next time? It's this sort of,
and vice versa,
and vice
right?
versa, right?
To be able to say to the kid, we talked about this. Remember, we're not speaking to each other that way. I think that the key here that I'm hearing, I love the modeling. Model, put voice to it, bring those topics of what feels safe, just the concept of safety. These kids have been raised in a conflict-oriented house. It's like just bringing the concept of safe. It's
well,
like,
I know I'm laughing because like I've got a couple, so I work a lot with couples. And I don't know, you don't as much as I do, Karen, but it's like, I have so many couples where they were raised in completely different family environments. And in this family, it was great to be loud. We were loud. It's like what we did. It's like we could, and then the other person's like, oh my gosh, every time you get loud, I think I'm in trouble. And so there's this sort of dynamic. And so
100%.
we all need to go through that process of going, what makes my nervous system feel safe? What doesn't make my nervous system feel safe? I mean, most of these kids, we're talking about neurodiverse kids. We've got kids who are in high conflict families. Their nervous systems aren't going to have a lot of time even feeling safe. And so that's the other thing I would add to this, Karen, is putting time in each day where everybody's down regulating. I remember really distinctly when my kids were little, we would lay on the floor and we would just kind of like feel the floor underneath our backs. Like we would rub each other's feet. We would take the deep breaths. We would relax. It was this sort of, let's do what we can at least once a day to feel as calm as we can. And as humans, we don't do that. It's like, as a society, we're walking around at a stress level of a 6 or a 7. In the families you guys are dealing with, you're walking around at an 8 or a 9 every day. And if you've got a neurodiverse kid, because they're struggling just to get through the day. I have a mom whose kid would get in the car every day. They'd slam the door of the car and the kid would just start sobbing because they'd been holding it together all day long just to get through the day at school. Our nervous systems are stretched.
Yeah. And so, you know, as the listener, your nervous system is equally stretched. It's just that somebody needs to be the leader. And we can all say how it sucks and it's not fair. But if you're on this podcast and listening, or you're listening to Diane's podcast, you're it. You're the leader. So it is.
I always joke, like, it's like the thing I always say to couples is like, whoever can be the grown up gets to be the grown up. Like, even if you're always the only one that can do it, if you can do it, then do it, because you're contributing to the family system, to the relationship, whatever it is. It's like, oh, wait, I can take the deep breath right now. I can calm my nervous system down. I can wait and respond instead of reacting. If you can do it, what a gift it is to give to your kids or to your relationship or to whoever. And I know it feels counterintuitive when you feel like somebody's beating up on you, that your natural tendency is to want to fight back. But I promise you, in the long run, we're talking about figuring out how to navigate differences in perspective rather than just ending arguments. And I think that that's the piece we want to get to.
And I want to just kind of point out that if you have learned that you're a codependent people pleaser, there's a very big difference between being codependent and being strategic, as we're talking about right now. Codependence is, I'm going to lay down, I'm going to be a doormat so he or she isn't upset so that I can control the outcome of something else. This is more about you want to have healthy boundaries with your soon-to-be ex, but when you're dealing with your kids, and even when you're dealing with your soon-to-be ex who's dysregulated, if you're the one who can be aware, who can notice, who can shift your story, who can manage yourself, who could model, who can put words to, you're gifting your children and you're gifting your soon-to-be ex to maybe pick up a little bit, shift a little bit, because your children are going to spend a lot of time with him or her as well.
Well, and I think this is the thing that we forget, is that the work, if you've got a dysregulated human, whether it's you or your co-parent or your kid, the work to change that behavior is not in that moment.
It's never in the moment.
It's never in the
Never
moment.
in the moment.
It's never in the moment. And that's the hard thing, because it's like, in the moment, the only job is regulate the family system. That's the only job. How do we regulate what's going on here? How do we down regulate? Whether it's down regulating myself, how do I help this other human down regulate? How do I separate so that we can down regulate? Work cannot be done in this moment. Work can be done when at least one, ideally both people are calm. And I know a lot of you are going to say, but my so-and-so is never calm. Okay, that does create a difficult situation. And there are situations where it's hard to talk about a particular topic without somebody getting inflamed. And you may need to be creative. You were talking about creativity. It's like, you may need to be creative. It's like, how can we have a conversation about X, which always makes you upset? Like, I have parents who have kids who can't talk about schoolwork, right? It's just sort of like, anytime they try to talk about schoolwork, the kid is just like, you never trust me with everything. You're a terrible mom, blah, blah, blah. And the door closes, right? And it's because they're dysregulated. And so then there's a conversation that says, I really would love to talk to you about school stuff. And I know that it's hard for you. What could we do that would make it feel safe enough? Is it like a 2-minute conversation? Is it, if I promise to just listen and not talk? Is it, it's this sort of, your job is to create a safe space to have the conversation instead of bullying your way into a conversation, which is never going to work.
Yeah. And I think that if you're listening, you're thinking, oh my God, like, really, do I have to pander to one more thing? I think that the coming full circle to accepting that one of the things, Diane, one of the greatest gifts she gave me was early on in our relationship, I was struggling with one of my kids. And I just saw them as they were misbehaving. And she said, well, is it naughty or neurological? And it just utterly stopped me in my tracks. And I had been for, I want to say not months, but years, just labeling them as being lazy, bad, whatever, without any understanding that what was going on between their ears was very different than the way my brain worked. And so I think that it's so important to come back to that description of neurodiversity, and that you're going through a divorce, everything's up in the air, your fear, your uncertainty is off the charts. And then when you're dealing with everyone else in your household having these issues, and we're saying to you, be the grown-up because you can.
Right.
This requires self-compassion. It requires self-love and self-care. And it requires accepting that neurodiversity exists in the other human beings under your roof, and that they are going to see things differently, react differently, and need more times and different strategies.
And naughty versus neurological is a great tool to use for all of us, right? It's just sort of whether we're talking about our kids or honestly our co-parents. I have parents who all the time are like, okay, is my co-parent's behavior naughty or neurological? And it's not that we know for 100% because we can't, right? It's just sort of, there are times that particularly adults do things with a goal of manipulating or whatever it is. And the reality is that if I see your behavior as wanton, like if I see my kid's behavior as rude, or my kid is being disrespectful, or all of those sorts of things, I'm going to get defensive. And if I get defensive, I'm going to get agitated. And if I get agitated, then I'm no longer the calm, confident parent that I want to be able to be. So the goal of naughty versus neurological is to go, okay, wait a second. If this was about neurodiversity, whether it's, again, whether you've got a kid who's got anxiety, ADHD, autism, giftedness, all those things, or if they're neurodivergent because they are stressed and anxious and they're in a really high conflict environment, either way, if I see their behavior as like they're just doing this on purpose, I'm not going to be able to engage with them at the same level as I can to go, okay, wait, this is a human that's having a hard time. This is a good kid having a hard time. There's so many different quotes that we could bring in here, but it's that reminder. Kids do well when they can, and so do humans.
And so I'm just going to share another quick quote that I got from you, which can go with so write it down if you're listening. Is it naughty or neurological? And Diane's other guidance for me, which I thought was brilliant and I use to this day, is always assume best intention.
Yeah.
And if you can't always assume best intention with your soon-to-be ex, you can always assume best intention with the people that you brought into the world or that you're parenting. And so always assume best intention immediately has you start out on a different foot.
Yeah. No, and so much of this is about us, right? We started there, we're going to end there, right? Which is just sort of really looking at, how am I showing up when I'm trying to parent? And am I showing up dysregulated and assuming and scared and like all this stuff that really doesn't help us to be as effective as we want to be as parents? Or can I create just enough space to be able to be a responsive and calm, compassionate parent, which is what most of us want and what humans thrive with, frankly.
Beautiful. Well, this has been a great conversation. We're going to have you back to talk about this in more detail. I know that you have a free gift for our listeners before we say goodbye.
Yeah, what I thought I'd share this time just as an intro is our top 12 tips to help your complex kid, right? And so if you happen to be a parent of a child with ADHD, anxiety, autism, giftedness, all the things we've talked about today, or even if you've just got a stressed out kid, it's a great tip sheet to help you look at the kinds of things that you can do differently to really change the dynamic between you and your kids.
That's perfect. And again, just mention your website and your podcast so that folks who want to track you down and follow you can do so.
Parenting with Impact is our podcast, and our website is impactparents.com.
Beautiful. That's in the show notes. So if you're driving or traveling, you can find it there. Diane, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great time.
Yeah, we'll be back again real soon. You guys take care. Good to go. Thanks for joining us on the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. I hope you found guidance and encouragement to help you along your journey. If you like my podcast, please take a minute to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. You can also visit us at jbddivorcesupport.com, where our team of coaches support both men and women through our one-on-one coaching, group programs, online courses, and free resources. Stay tuned for our next episode, and I'll talk to you soon.